And joining us via Zoom is Dr Mathetha Mokonyama, who is Manager for Transport Systems and Operations at the Council for Scientific and Industrial Research. Dr Mokonyama, a very good evening to you. Thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to the Globe.
Good evening, sir. Thank you.
Well, historically, fighting over routes within the taxi industry dates back to the apartheid era. Why has the violence continued so unabated in a democratic South Africa?
Well, there are probably a number of reasons, many reasons. But I think what is important is that everybody needs to play their role. Law enforcement agencies need to play their role, at municipal level, provincial level as well. And what you're finding is that there is a vacuum. There is a vacuum that has been created to an extent that the associations have created quasi, law enforcement, agencies because of that vacuum. If you look at the number of outstanding cases that have been reported over the years, they are in the hundreds that haven't been resolved. So it appears that the capacity required to enforce the rules is very limited. So not much resource. Not many resources have been allocated to resolving these issues, and as a result, the associations, are taking matters into their own hands.
What could have possibly created this vacuum, as you've rightly put it? And are there any areas of cooperation in terms of these associations coming together to try fill that vacuum?
Well, there are many associations in the province, Gauteng, for example. I'm looking at the numbers now. The Johannesburg alone, you've got about 63 or so associations. Ekurhuleni, 60 associations. Sedibeng, 53 associations. So essentially, you've got a lot of associations. The number of taxis operating, you've got about, 90,000 or so in the province. So if you have to deal with each operator alone, you have to deal with something like 40,000 operators. So that is would be a mammoth task. So there's a need for the taxi industry to find a way to create an interface with the state, so that you don't have to deal with so many players at the same time.
I mean, Santako says government has to intervene regarding the taxi routes matter. So what can government do then when the taxi associations themselves are failing to resolve these issues?
Well, what we've been trying to do actually with Gauteng province is to digitize the whole value chain, the taxi industry value chain, so that who is an operator, who is a driver, what routes they operate on, which vehicles they use, so that at any given time exactly who is operating where they are. As a result, you can then enforce things appropriately. We've also been working with some of the cities to automate, or let me say to rationalize how these routes are allocated, so that you match demand with supply appropriately. These things can be done. You just have to allocate resources for these things. Digitizing the network is something. The technology is there. It exists. So you can tell at any given time who is operating where, and if there is anyone operating where they're not supposed to operate, you are then able to pick that up and then sanction accordingly.
Are the taxi associations a law unto themselves?
Well, some do say that. I think it is getting to a point where, because of the vacuum that has been created by lack of enforcement, the Gauteng province, commissioned a whole inquiry into violence in the province. The findings and the recommendations recommendations need to be implemented. So the report, that investigation shows that we are moving more and more towards lawlessness, and to an extent that the taxi industry, elements of the taxi industry are taking the law into their hands because of the vacuum, that has been created.
Well, fortunately, no injuries have been reported, even though a case of malicious damage to property has been observed. I mean, when will the taxi industry ever get to a point where they can resolve their differences without resorting to violence all the time?
Yeah, that definitely calls for leadership. It calls for leadership in the industry, but you're first providing a public service before you are providing you are running a business. This is a public service, it's a public transport service. So you're there to provide service for the public. So if you see it as a money-making enterprise first, as opposed to a public service, then things like this do happen. So you first have to say that I'm providing a service. We are providing a service. As we issue this operating license as a city of Johannesburg, we want you to operate this service. These are the norms and standards that we want you to aspire to. So as long as you don't see that, and as long as that is not enforced, then the money-making part takes precedence.
And the taxi industry, Dr. Mokonyama, as a sector, has still not received the COVID-19 relief fund from government. So could the recent violence be a symptomatic reaction to the much bigger and the structural issues in the industry?
Yes. Well, the Department of Transport, National Department of Transport, did, I think around February this year, gazette conditions under which they will be making those payments, relief payments. They clearly state this is what you need to do. So the government is saying we want to pay you to provide you with this relief, but you need to comply. But the industry has been saying those conditions that you have stated, we don't want to comply with, or we have problems essentially with some of the conditions that you have put in there. So I think there's a bigger problem, yes, like you state, the problem of financing of the public transport generally. The services are getting more and more expensive. Taxis are getting very expensive. I think at some stage we will look at the numbers. If you own a small car, running a small car, the cost of using a taxi per kilometer are getting closer and closer to just the cost of running a small car. So you're better off, if you can afford a car, to drive. So that in a way is going to threaten in the long term the industry. But overall, the financing of public transport in South Africa needs to be looked at. Currently, we devote about 0.8% equivalent of GDP to financing public transport in the country. And we've been saying that we need to increase it to the tune of about 5% of GDP to be able to address the backlogs that are there, and to be able to just relieve the society from the burden that they carry with this high cost of transport in the country.
All right. Great chatting to you, Dr. Mokonyama. Thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Thank you.
All right, that was Dr. Mathetha Mokonyama, who is the Manager for Transport Systems and Operations at the Council for Scientific and Industrial Research.